In the previous mini lecture we looked at the general structure of phrases and said that phrases have heads that determine the properties of the whole phrase, and they also have modifiers. What kind of categories are head and modifier? Well, we suggested that they were functional properties because they have to do with the job that those particular constituents perform in the phrase as a whole. We now turn to the internal structure by looking at the things that can be heads and modifiers, and that differs from phrase to phrase, and it's obvious to you already from the previous session that heads can be nouns or verbs or adjectives or prepositions. Well, depending on what it is that is the head, various other things can be modifiers. We'll start with the noun phrase. Let's look at some examples. What's the head word in the dog? Well, dog seems to be the head there. It's a noun because it can take a plural. In B, it's program that is the head because it can take a plural, and the other things are telling us more about the program. They're telling us that there's a single program, a program, and that the program's moderately short. So as far as headedness is concerned, program is the important bit, and the other things are telling us more about it. Some very old cars, well, cars is the head, and the other constituents, the modifiers, are telling us more about the cars. In the case of 6 bags of wholemeal flour, we have 2 nouns. There's the noun bags and the noun flour. Which one of those is the head? Well, we have to look at what it is that is telling us about what. Is it the bags telling us about the flour, or is the flour telling us about the bags? Well, the wholemeal flour is what's in the bags. As far as the flour is concerned, the bags tell us nothing about it. Very dirty marks on walls. Well, where are the marks? They're on the walls. So marks is the head, and on the walls is telling us more about the marks, namely it's telling us where they are. How do we represent that? Well, we can go back to our old friend the tree diagram, and here's a tree diagram. Dog is the head, it's a noun, therefore it's the head of a noun phrase. And out on the left there's a modifier, and we haven't got a label for that yet. We will soon. What about something much bigger? Here's a little box diagram at the top. It tells us that a moderately short program is the head, and the and moderately short are both modifiers. Let's put the categories on it now. Program is a noun, and therefore the head of a noun phrase, and moderately short is an adjective phrase because it too has a head, and the head is short, and moderately tells us not more about program but more about short. It tells us how short, and says there's one of them. One program, not one short. So a moderately short program has one head and 2 modifiers. One of these modifiers is itself a phrase. So what we've got here is a phrase sitting inside another phrase. Well, that tells us what the heads and the modifiers are, but what are they in terms of their syntactic structure? Let's start by looking at more or less the first thing that most noun phrases have. They have a determiner. Determiners are of 2 sorts. There are the articles. The is the definite article, and is the indefinite article. Why are they called definite and indefinite? Well, if you're talking about something and you say the whatever it is, you're assuming that you and the hearer already know what it is because you've either spoken about it before or it's obvious from the context. Therefore, whatever it is somehow definite. If you haven't talked about it before, then the chances are that you're going to use if it's a single thing. So you can say a cat. A cat was walking along. Well, we haven't talked about that cat before. It's a new cat. A little later on in the story you say the cat was now blah blah blah, and we've talked about it the once and now we know which one, so it's the cat. The articles, definite and indefinite. Then there are 4 items called the demonstratives, and they're a nice little set. They're mutually exclusive with a and the. You either have one or the other. You can't go the this or a that. This, that, these and those are interesting. This and that go with singular nouns. They modify singular nouns, and these and those modify plural nouns. So our old friends singular and plural are coming back again because we're talking about nouns again. But what about this and that? Well, this is closer and that is further away. These are closer and those are further away. But that doesn't necessarily have to be in dimensions that we can measure directly. This might be this pen on my desk, and that pen on my desk might be a little further away. This planet, our planet, is close to us. That planet might be light years away. Quite different dimensions from the pens on the desk. Now, that sounds a little bit like the way in which adjectives take ER and EST, you remember? Gradable adjectives. They also have this capacity for the dimensions to change. What's hotter in one case and hotter in the other case are quite different. These, that. These, those. This, that. We also use them metaphorically, of course. We can say, there's this chap that I know, and there's that man over there, and we're pushing them away or bringing them closer. So we can use these more or less metaphorically. Then there are numerals. There are 2 sorts of numerals. There are the cardinal numerals, 1, 2, and 3. So we can say the 3 people in this group, and the comes first, then 3. Or we can use ordinal numbers, the first person, the second person, the third person, so they come after the determiners. Then there are quantifiers, which also do quantities, but not as exactly as the numerals. The numerals you can count, and of course they will go with count nouns and not with non-count nouns. The quantifiers are much vaguer. All. How many are all? Well, it depends on the set you have in mind. All the people in this room might be 3 or 25. It's just the full number in the set. Some, there's no particular number. Even if we think of the whole set, how many are some? Well, it's fewer than all. How many are many? Well, a lot if we know how many we have to start with. Most is a majority of all, and few is under half maybe. And yet, however vague the meanings of these quantifiers are, they're incredibly useful, and we use them all without any effort at all. We know exactly what we're talking about, even if the meaning might be rather vague. Well, after all of these preliminary short sets of closed sets of words, we can get adjective phrases. We can say, the very red bicycle. Very red is an adjective phrase because it has a head, which is an adjective. And very doesn't tell us about bicycle, it tells us about red. So those two go together and they make up an adjective phrase. Then there are possessives. Possessives are interesting because they have apostrophes, and apostrophes are interesting because people don't know how to use them, generally speaking. What's a possessive? A possessive is a noun phrase that behaves like a determiner. Let's have a look at an example. The bishop's residences. Well, the head of that whole phrase is residences, because the bishop's tells us more about the residences. It tells us maybe that he's the chap who lives there. Well, the bishop is itself a noun phrase. The tells us about bishop, a particular bishop. And the apostrophe S says this particular noun phrase is in the same position as a determiner. A singer's vocal cords. singer has vocal cords. And you'll notice the apostrophe S in this case comes after the noun, and it tells us that this is a possessive noun phrase, meaning it's in determinate position. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with possession in some funny sort of way. A singer does have vocal cords. They do sort of possess them, but they haven't bought them at the supermarket. The new committee's duties. This is a singular committee, and so the apostrophe S comes after the noun phrase. So these are noun phrases in determinate position. What would happen if the bishop was plural, if there was more than one of them? The bishop's residences, a number of bishops. Well, the apostrophe would go after the S, because then there would be plural bishops. The S would be the plural of bishop and not the possessive ending. If there were lots of singers with vocal cords, then we couldn't say a singer, because we'd need the singers, plural, vocal cords. So it looks as though the apostrophe S, or just the apostrophe, goes on the end of the head noun of the NP noun phrase, which is in determinate position. Well, that isn't quite true. What if we said the Bishop of Woolwich's residences? Well, that shows us that the apostrophe S actually goes right on the end of the whole NP, not on the end of the head word of the noun phrase in determinate position. So, look at the apostrophe. If we want to rehabilitate the apostrophe, one of its uses is in possessive noun phrases. And all you've got to do is ask yourself, which noun phrase is it that's in determinate position, and put the apostrophe or the apostrophe S after the whole of that noun phrase. How do we show that in a tree diagram? Well, exactly as I've just suggested. Look at the noun phrase and either put apostrophe S if it's singular, or just an apostrophe if the noun phrase is plural. There are more constituents of noun phrases that come after the head noun. Prepositional phrases happen quite commonly. The man in the moon, the dog up the tree, the cat in the cat house. In the moon is a prepositional phrase, and it comes after the head noun. So the whole phrase, the whole noun phrase, is the man in the moon, but in the moon is itself a prepositional phrase coming after the man. Why do we know it's a prepositional phrase? Because it starts with a preposition, and we worked out previously that prepositions can be the heads of phrases, namely prepositional phrases. Finally, we'll look at pronouns. When you were at primary school, if you were lucky to have had an old-fashioned teacher who talked about pronouns, they would have said pronouns stand for a noun. Well, that's both true and not true. Pronouns only stand for a noun if the noun is the sole noun in a noun phrase. The fact is, pronouns stand for noun phrases, whole noun phrases. Put technically, pronouns have noun phrases as antecedents. What's an antecedent? Someone who came before. Your parents are your antecedents, and so are your grandparents and great-grandparents. They came before you. So pronouns have antecedents, and their antecedents are noun phrases. Let's have a look at an example. The snake slid through the grass as it tried to escape. What's the antecedent of it? Answer, the snake. Right, here's a noun phrase, it, a pronoun, that has a whole noun phrase as an antecedent. So pronouns are themselves noun phrases, and they're one-word noun phrases. They have an interesting property. They are subject to something called agreement. When you select a pronoun, you have to think about what it is that is its antecedent. In the case of the snake, we know that the snake is singular. Well, so is it. We know that the snake is, as far as the language goes, not a little boy snake or a little girl snake. It's an animal snake, and so it's an it. If we knew what its sex was, we could say he or she, particularly if we were kindly disposed towards it. Grandmothers, obviously, are she, and Uncle Jim is obviously a he, and the lawnmower is an it. Right, so this is not them or they, this is she or he or it. The pronoun seems to require a lookup of its antecedent for its number and its gender. The team, however, is plural, so the right pronoun choice there is they. And in Kuiper and Allan, we've got a table showing you all of the choices that you make on a regular basis to choose the right pronoun. There's something else about pronouns that's interesting. They vary also according to their position in the sentence. If we look at that sentence, there are 3 pronouns, he, her, and them. We can't change the form of any of those to another one, so that, for example, he becomes him, and her becomes she, and them becomes they. All of that's impossible. And the reason is that he is in one position in the sentence, and her is in another, and them is in still another. So as well as looking at the number and the gender of the antecedent, pronouns are also sensitive to where they come in the sentence themselves. And all of these things we do with no effort at all.